What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and we've got a special guest today, Jon Weisman, who's the author of 100 Things Dodger Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, as well as Brother in Arms. He's somebody who's covered the Dodgers for more than 30 years at the LA Times, Los Angeles Daily News, ESPN.com, et cetera, et cetera. So, Jon, we appreciate your time, and it's got to be exciting to have a new version of 100 Things Dodgers Fans Should Know and Do out.
Well, it's most exciting because of the reason that it happened, which is, waiting for that World Series title. It was always a possibility. I really thought it was going to happen in 2017. I thought I was going to have that plus Brothers in Arms as a double header coming out, but we had to wait a few more years. But it's good, and we've got Mookie on the back cover and a lot of stuff. So I'm really happy about it.
Awesome. Well, I've got a Mookie Betts for you question in a moment, but let me start with, you said the reason for the new edition is the World Series championship. As you're scrolling through the table of contents, you've got Jackie Robinson number 1, Vin Scully number 2, Sandy Koufax number 3, 1955 number 4, and then 2020 is number 5, right ahead of 1988, Clayton Kershaw, Fernando Valenzuela. Off we go. So without sort of rehashing all of the process and the book itself, I'd love to hear the process that you went through to determine where does this championship rank among a list of, for a franchise that has a ton of great moments.
It's not a scientific process, I will tell you that. It was difficult, and it was something I did spend time on. I felt, not to diminish 1988, which is really kind of the definitive championship for so many people, certainly before 2020, that was all anyone had to go with. I think the fact that the wait was so hard, that it was such a difficult time, was what made me put 2020 ahead of 1988, and at the same time behind 1955, because the wait for 1955 was even longer. That was the entire history of the franchise, and even in the modern era, it was 55 years.
Yeah.
And I think with 1988, and again, I value that above anything, but right. But you take away Kirk Gibson's homer. Aside from that, the story, and you have Hershiser. It's a great season. It's a great accomplishment. The team was not expected to beat the A's, but it had only been 7 years since the previous title. It was not entirely unexpected, despite the idea that the A's were favorites. I mean, that yes, the Dodgers were underdogs going into the playoffs, but not ridiculous underdogs. Yeah. I don't think anyone, with the way Hershiser was pitching and with Gibson on the team, was counting the Dodgers out. And it only became more extraordinary through all the injuries that the Dodgers suffered. It was a good team, and on a smaller scale compared to 2020, it was a team that was had been waiting its turn, trying to get there. But 2020 was had so much riding on it. In an extraordinary year, not only for the franchise, but for, the planet.
Yeah.
So I just felt like people are a little tired of 1988. Let's give 2020 as much due as we can.
And it's, in looking at the chapter, you kind of tell the story somewhat starting through the lens of Mookie Betts and the acquisition of him. And I think what's so unique, just looking at 2020 and 1988 side by side, is that when you say 1988, everyone immediately goes to one defining moment. As you said, the Kirk Gibson home run, of course. When you think of 2020, is there a defining moment? I mean, is it the Mookie Betts trade, which actually happened before the season started? It's kind of interesting to think of, even throughout the NLCS and the World Series, like maybe Bellinger's home run in the NLCS, or just Urias getting the final out. There isn't like a standalone, every Dodger fan for all of time will think of this moment in 2020, right?
There's not a singular one. There's too many to choose from. If you're asking me what's the first moment I go to, it's the Mookie Betts play in Game 5, because that's where the entire thing turned around. The Dodgers basically, with healthy competition from San Diego, did roll to the playoffs, and every game was a nail biter in the sense that any loss was going to bring on this great feeling of peril. And when the Dodgers went down 3-1, you couldn't even converse on Twitter at that point. And they were in trouble in Game 5.
Yeah.
And if Mookie Betts doesn't make that play, I don't know what happens. I don't know if anything else after that happens.
Yeah.
And so for me, I mean, the celebration after the catch in, I believe, Game 6 is maybe the most joyous thing. Well, again, up until Hernandez, Bellinger, Urias, but that catch and throw,
yeah.
everything hinged on that, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it, again, Mookie Betts it's the perfect person to have in that moment because he encapsulates 2020 in so many ways, going back to the trade and everything he brought. Moving away from 2020, one of the other things I noticed looking through your book is that besides Clayton Kershaw, Justin Turner is kind of the highest ranked current player on your list. I'm curious from your perspective as somebody who's been around the team for so long, following the team, what is it about Justin Turner that resonates even more than, some of the other guys behind him, Sean Green, Cody Bellinger, Corey Seager, Eric Gagne? What is it about Turner that you think resonates so deeply?
Well, first, I'll be honest with you. After you get out of like the top 20, I wasn't as hardcore with the rankings.
Okay.
Because of the revision. I didn't want to start moving a ton of stuff around. That being said, I did value Turner. I think he's meaningful in a way of just sort of, the guy I think of when I think of Turner is Jim Gilliam. Now, Jim Gilliam was retired by the time I was a fan. In fact, he died during, 1978 when I was almost 11. So I barely knew who he was. And to me, he was only a coach. But the more I read about his career and just the fact that how highly the Dodgers valued him above and beyond his very real contributions on the field, to the point that they would, and part of it was the sentiment of the moment. He literally died during the playoffs. But he is the only, as you know, the only retired number that isn't in the Hall of Fame, and they've held fast against that. And it's not like the Dodgers were eager to retire numbers back then. It's just that's how much they valued him. And so when I think of Justin Turner, I just think of someone whose value goes far beyond what's what he does on the field. His value to the fans. I'm not really talking about his value to the clubhouse, although it's there.
Yeah.
I really think his value to the fans. I think he's as universally beloved as a Dodger can be. The COVID thing happened at the end of the World Series, and that put a dent in things. But I mean, I really think he's an extraordinary guy, and that's why I felt all along during the offseason that it made sense to re-sign him, even if he wasn't destined to be a long-term starter at third base. He really should retire as a Dodger next to Kershaw. He's the one that I feel strongly, I hope, retired. Kershaw is Kobe, basically. Kershaw is like, I don't care what it takes. And then Turner, in a sense, Turner becomes Chase Utley. Turner becomes David Freese. Turner becomes one of these guys that even if he's not playing every day, and I'm not sure next year, I mean, it'll depend on the DH or not. But I'm not sure how long he's meant to be a full-time third baseman. But he's just a really significant player, I think, for the franchise and for the fan base.
Yeah, I mean, and I think being one of the only guys who was successful in the playoffs consistently over a stretch in which it felt like nobody was successful consistently in the playoffs, I think helps. I think he's a local kid, etc. I'm curious, one other question looking at the current roster, and this is, I know you said the rankings aren't scientific, so I'm not going to ask you for a hard and fast number. 10 years from now, where does Mookie Betts end up on a list like this?
Well, I mean, he could very well be top 20 because the thing is that top 20 is so hard to crack.
Yeah.
And the fact that if he goes into the Hall of Fame, I think he'll go as a Dodger.
Yeah.
And that's really significant because outside of Kershaw, that's all you're really looking at right now for the Hall of Fame. Although interestingly, and this will be my least popular opinion, I suspect, after Kershaw and Betts comes Dave Roberts.
I've got a Dave Roberts question for you coming up.
Okay, so we'll hold that thought. But Betts was tricky for this first one because in many ways he deserved his own chapter, but in other ways he literally had played less than 100 games with the team, and I wasn't really comfortable giving him a chapter at that point. So I gave him a very long sidebar in the 2020 chapter, and it comes early in the book. He's on the back cover. I feel that should hold people for now. I obviously am hopeful that someday there will be a 4th edition of the book and that I can give Mookie his due. But it's no real slights intended, but this isn't 100 Things Rays fans should know.
Right.
This is a very long and deep history.
Totally.
And this is, when you think about the fact that this is the first edition of the book to come out since April of 2013, literally opening day of the 8 division titles in a row, there was so much I had to pack in that it was a real juggling act.
Well, let's go to Dave Roberts. You're the perfect person to ask because, again, you're thinking big picture. So often we're doing these shows and, people are critical of this decision Dave Roberts made and I'll be perfectly honest. I'm among them sometimes with pitching decisions or, leaving us with Clayton Kershaw as a pinch hitter and the bases loaded of an extra inning game, whatever it might be. But I also catch myself and remind myself of, put this in context, Jeff, of who else you've watched manage the Dodgers. Like, as someone born in 1988, it isn't exactly an illustrious list of the world's greatest managers of all time. And so as you say Dave Roberts, probably next on the list, potential Hall of Famer. And I agree, because if he manages this team for the next 10 years and the success continues at the rate that it's going, it's going to be almost a no-brainer, it seems like. Where do you put Dave Roberts? I mean, not necessarily in the scope of baseball, although you can go there, but in the scope of Dodger managers. I mean, it's hard to judge some of these things because how much talent does he have versus how much talent did Tommy Lasorda have, etc. But from your perspective, where does Dave Roberts rank among all-time Dodger managers?
Well, let me be clear. He's got a long way to
Totally.
go. He's in season number 6, and my premise for him going to the Hall of Fame is that he goes at least 20 years.
Okay.
And he may stop managing in November, for all I know.
Yeah.
For what, either by his choice or by someone else's. I mean, if this season goes awry, and I don't think it will. I mean, I think it's a challenge for any team to repeat as a World Series title, and I don't think that's the criteria that Roberts should be judged by. I know that's the criteria a lot of fans will judge him by. But let's say basically, I guess the way I want to answer your question is to put it in context with Lasorda and Alston, who are the clear top 2, I think, certainly in the past since World War II.
Jim Tracy doesn't get into that.
Jim Tracy won't qualify, no. And I've been a baseball fan for almost 50 years. I caught the very tail end of the Alston era, so that I've read enough about him to know if you were watching Alston or Lasorda, the way you watch Roberts today, God help us if social media existed then, those guys would have been ripped up, down, and sideways on a regular basis, constant basis. Anger, blame. The Dodgers ultimately won 2 World Series titles with Lasorda in 20 years.
Yeah.
I think an even 20. That ratio, I mean, that ratio is not going to work in the social media era. And so you have to step back a little bit and go, okay, Dave Roberts has around 500 wins. He's 49 years old, and he has a World Series title and 3 pennants. If he wins if he manages for 15 more years, that only takes him to age 65. He wins 1 or 2 more World Series. If he wins 2 more World Series in that time and reaches Lasorda's win level, which is about 1,600 or so, I don't know how you don't put him in.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Like, based on every criteria that the committees have used, you look at Bruce Bochy for the Giants. He's a 3-time World Series champion. That punched his ticket. He has a below 500 career record.
Yeah.
And he retired at a reasonably young, he retired in his 60s. He didn't do Connie Mack. He didn't do some extraordinary winning percentage. He just endured and, hit pay dirt a few times. 2 of those teams didn't even win their division.
Yeah.
So part of it is that the standard for Hall of Fame managers is a little lower than it is for Hall of Fame ball players. Um, but Dave Roberts has as good a head start as you could hope for. And I'm sorry, I don't buy into the idea that it's all talent. It's in other words, every team that wins the World Series is basically a talented team. If you want to give sort of credit for the 1988 title, you have to remove credit for the better teams he had that didn't win. Yeah. So I'm not really. I don't think trying to microanalyze how talented the team is really serves any purpose in this argument for any manager. Do they do that? If they are someone that could survive for 20 plus years and win enough to have something to celebrate, to me, that's, like it or not, that's the criteria for a Hall of Fame manager.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting with Roberts, too, because even if you have more talent, the standard that you're held to is then higher. So it's almost like the standard you're held to is relative to the talent. And so the question is, how are you at performing at or above the level that people are expecting of you? And for Roberts, he's going to have all the tools necessary to do exactly what you said and go win 1,000 more games if he wants to, if he sticks around long enough. Because, you know, I say confidently that Andrew Friedman is going to continue to load up this roster and this lineup with prospects and guys coming through and free agents and whatnot. And so I haven't thought of Dave Roberts as a Hall of Fame manager, but, you know, yeah, to your point, like the trajectory that he is on, where he's never lost the division and, he's been to the World Series half of the time, going into another year in which he's the World Series favorite this year, it's hard to argue with kind of where that's headed. Let me ask you one question about the 2021 team, and then I've got 5 rapid-fire questions for you. We'll get you out of there on that. The 2021, what do you make of this group so far? They've got the 3rd best record in the National League, but there's been a level of inconsistency that I think is frustrating. What do you think of this team, and maybe where does it rank from a talent perspective in your mind among some of the teams of the last few decades?
Well, the year they were going to win the World Series was always going to be a year where they had a certain amount of luck, and a lot of that luck is health. And last year, that was a pretty healthy team. It was about as healthy a team as I think we've had during this eight-year run, and they don't have that this year. And I really do think that's the primary difference. I mean, the bullpens, you could look at individual parts, but the bullpen's basically the same. It's solid at the front, but not perfect. It's been rough in the back because we've had guys come up to pitch that really had no business being there. They haven't had a healthy starting lineup, I think, since Game 5 of the season. So, and the Padres are the same. The Padres are also battling health issues, but extremely talented and more talented than ever. And at this point, the Giants you have to take seriously. I don't personally think the Giants will finish first, but you can't pretend they aren't. I think they're the thinnest team of all, but you can't pretend they don't have something going this year. I mean, during this run at times in June, there have been years the Dodgers have been 10 games out of first place in June. So I'm not particularly panicked, but there's very much a possibility that either the Dodgers wind up in a wild card game against, Jacob deGrom. Real possibility. And if they escape that, they get Yu Darvish or they get, Kevin Gausman or something, and they lose. Or they win the World Series again.
Yeah.
And I do like the idea that the injuries, hopefully they've happened early. You get hopefully Muncy's not serious. Hopefully Seager comes back strong in July, maybe rested more than he otherwise would have been. And you have a lineup that really gels. And, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Gonsolin, I think, in the near future. And that could go a ways into determining what happens at the trade deadline. But, like any season, it's up for grabs. And all you can say about the Dodgers is that there is no better contender, I don't think, than the Dodgers. They're just maybe the differences between them are minute.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, some rapid fire questions to throw at you. And one of these you kind of hinted at, but I'll shorten the time frame. In your estimation, the last 30 years, who's the most underrated Dodger, underappreciated Dodger?
Oh, Gosh, my mind doesn't work that well. Um, like the first guy that comes to mind is Chris Taylor because he's so current. Well, I'll throw one out. I won't. Don't hold me to this permanently, but I think Chad Billingsley was really underappreciated. I don't think he was very popular after what happened in the playoffs, but I also feel like he got an unfair amount of blame for a series the Dodgers really weren't going to win.
Yeah.
And it never left. Like that stayed with him for the rest of his Dodger career. And he was really, before he got hurt, he was a terrific pitcher.
Yeah.
And I always thought he got kind of a raw deal. And I always liked him.
I like that one.
And in this era, he'd be thriving. I mean, he's still pitching in an era where they wanted you to go 8 or 9 innings. In this era, he would absolutely thrive.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I could think of more, but I'll go with him for starters.
Well, and sort of putting your name next to Clayton Kershaw doesn't help either when it comes to managing expectations of the guy next to Kershaw. Why aren't you doing what he's doing? Okay. Can you think of, this is one of my favorite questions to ask people that follow the team. Can you think of a prospect that you were convinced was going to pan out and didn't?
Well,
to whatever degree, because I know panning out to some people is I thought he was going to be a Hall of Famer and he turned out to be okay, or he never even made it.
Again, a lot of choices there. I was suspicious of Joel Guzman because he didn't walk. So as much as I was really kind of believing him, I had some reservations about him. Andy LaRoche.
There you go.
Before he got hurt, I thought he was really, really a promising hitter. There's guys, all kinds of guys. Greg Miller never made it out of single A, I don't think, because he got hurt. Again, I'm just too old to think that systematically about these things, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Basically.
Okay. Favorite Dodger of your lifetime?
Well, I have tears for this. Pedro Guerrero, as in terms of the talent and just the excitement. R.J. Reynolds and Pedro Estacio were not, Dodger greats, but they were good ball players who gave me two of the greatest memories of my lifetime. One of them was in a pennant race, and one of them was in 1992 when the Dodgers were in last place. But they were great memories. But I will say the player that I'm more invested in than any other is definitely Kershaw. I mean, so deeply entwined with my soul is so deeply entwined with how well he does that World Series title for him. I'll never be the same again. I know other fans are desperate to win another title. I won't ever worry as much for the rest of my life like I did last year.
I always told people, if somehow Kershaw was on a team other than the Dodgers, I was torn about whether I wanted a World Series more for Kershaw or for the Dodgers at some point in his career. I'm grateful that we never had to choose between those two things, right. But I'm with you. Okay. You talk food in your book a little bit. You mentioned the Dodger dog. I'm curious, again, this is an off-the-wall question here, but is there a non-Dodger dog item at Dodger Stadium that you're particularly fond of?
Well, first of all, and I'll eat a Dodger dog anytime one falls into my lap. But the Brooklyn dog is the best dog at Dodger Stadium.
Okay, there you go.
And you can't get it at every stand, but it's worth seeking out. Okay. It's a level above.
Okay.
The Kulaku was my all-time favorite dessert there. They don't sell it anymore, but in its heyday, it was outstanding. And I'll really just stick with that.
Love it. Last one. You kind of hinted at this earlier. How does 2021 season end for the Dodgers?
I really don't want to answer. I think it's so hard to repeat.
Yeah.
I'm keeping my expectations pretty tame. Once the whole idea of them winning 110 plus games kind of went out the window, they're going to have to grind to get into the first round of the playoffs. Yeah. And that's going to be a tough grind. And literally as you and I are speaking, the whole thing with like the pitchers, the stickiness, the spin, all that stuff is so up in the air right now that I don't know what kind of effect that's going to have on the team. And there are good teams out there in the NL and in the AL, and DeGrom is on a team that is, again, I don't think is a better team than the Dodgers, but he sort of changes the scope of it.
Yeah.
I can't answer your question. I'm hopeful, but the odds are genuinely against them.
Yeah.
So what can you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jon, I appreciate your time. Where can people go and find your books?
Anywhere online. I mean, and I assume in bookstores, although if you can find a bookstore, let me know. Actually, I should make a drive down to like Marina Del something and see if it's hit Barnes & Noble yet. I hope it has. But basically, all the bookstore sellers, including the independent ones like Bookshop and what's it called? Indie something. Sorry, I'm blanking. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all of it. And Triumph Books is the publisher. You can also get it from there.
Awesome.
But yeah, I hope you get it. And I really do think it's a great book, whether you're coming to it fresh or whether you have previous editions. There's a lot of good material in there.
Awesome. And then where can people find you on social media?
At Jon Weisman, JonWeisman on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, Jon, I appreciate your time. Thank you for the book. It's fun to just think through these things, and rankings are a beautiful thing because they give people things to think about, things to argue about, and obviously lots for us to learn about. So that's Jon Weisman. I'm Jeff Spiegel. We appreciate everybody watching. Again, check out Dodger Blue 1958 everywhere on social media for the latest updates. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.